Breaking right now. Nigel Farage has described last night's election result in Wales as a big win and said that is the reason Labour is panicking. Of course, this comes after a whole load of positive polling for the insurgent party. The deputy leader, Richard Tice, posting Nigel Farage is the most popular PM choice, almost twice that of Kemi. The chairman, Zia Youssef, talking about a resounding win for reform and arguing that our campaign machine is starting to fire. I mean, in all fairness, when you actually do look at those results, wow. They've gone from nothing to 47%, Labour down 49% to 26%. Of course, the latest polling also suggests a majority for reform. So maybe it's no wonder that Tory grandees are now publicly discussing what was unthinkable even just a few weeks ago. In a new interview with the GB News political editor, Christopher Hope, Sir Edward Lee, the father of the house, has said that there is a 70% chance that there is either a merger or an electoral pact between the two parties before the next election. And he certainly didn't express much support for the failing Kemi Badenoch either, saying he has no idea if she will be in charge. But Farage's former spinner, Gwaine Tola, has dismissed that suggestion, saying 70% of statistics are made up on the spot. Sir Edward has no idea what he is talking about. Not a single reform figure is interested, only Tories desperate to save their skins. As for policies, reform are not a high-tax, mass immigration, net zero-loving bunch of woke ideologues. Now, Claire Fox, you were, of course, a Brexit Party MEP. You were essentially working under Nigel Farage. You know a lot about him. You know how he works at close quarters. Firstly, are you tempted? Are you one of these people who thinks maybe I want to be part of this reform action? And given how much you know about Nigel, do you see the potential of him becoming Prime Minister?
So I think that the result in Wales is very significant. By the way, I'm Baroness Fox of Buckley, and Buckley's in North Wales, and I've got a lot of family and friends in Wales. And it was very difficult in Wales. It really is a Labour heartland, and it really is not going to be a Labour heartland. And you made the point about me being a Brexit Party MEP. I was partly inspired by the people of Wales who carried on voting Labour, but huge numbers voted to leave the European Union, and then were talked down to by the Labour grandees in Wales, who call them racist and xenophobe and stupid and all that argument we've heard before. So I was delighted to see Reform do so well in that council election, and I hope we'll see more of it. But I suppose one of the things that I think that's peculiar about this discussion is it's almost as though, no disrespect to Nigel or Richard or any of the Reform or Zia or anyone, it's almost as though it doesn't really matter what Reform do now. The public have decided that Reform are the way of shaking up mainstream politics. You know, the two-party system is really cracking, really falling apart. And so when you ask me if I'm going to be part of Reform, it's not really, I'm a non-affiliated peer. My big passion is the Academy of Ideas and the work I do with that. And I know, and you said I worked under Nigel Farage. I've never worked under anyone, so let me tell you. So I worked alongside.
He was the lead. He was the leader of the party that you were serving.
I was nonetheless, and credit to him for having stood in the elections, brought the Brexit Party together. But I'm only making that point because, nobody would want me in their party because I'd be too argumentative and stroppy. But the thing
Claire, he did want you.
I know. Well, for now, in a proper political party, listen, I'm a critical friend. I want Reform to shake things up. I really genuinely hope that things will. I don't want Reform to become complacent, because polls are polls. And in the end, you have to win the arguments and you have to win the people round. But I have talked to so many people who contacted me from the old Brexit Party days, voters, I mean now, rather than anyone important. And they're people who don't particularly like Nigel Farage, weren't going to join Reform. Some of them went back and voted Labour at the last election, just in the hope that Labour might have got sensible, and they were so furious with the betrayal by the Tories. Some of them carried on voting Tories and lots of them didn't vote at all. Now what's happened is they're all joining Reform. They're not just joining, but they're organising local groups. And I'm talking about trade union organisers. I'm talking about real Labour Party hardliners. So that becomes really problematic when you get this talk of a Tory Reform merger, because it can't just be seen as a kind of, Conservative Party. It's got to have that sense of changing politics for good, part of the new political realignment that goes way beyond the traditional left-right lines, that is not to do with either the Conservative Party or the Labour Party. Now, I think if Reform does really well, as anticipated, in the next general election, it might well have to form a government with another party. And that's different than actually doing a pact before the general election, which I think would be ill-advised, because it would disillusion those people who really don't see themselves, never seen themselves as Tories, but actually are appealed to by a kind of common sense politics, socially conservative in some ways, economically very mixed when it comes to reform. But the main thing is that they want a populist uprising, a bit like what happened in America, right?
Yes, we need it.
Exactly. And a lot of people who voted for Trump don't really like Trump. They wouldn't consider themselves to be Republicans. Do you know what I mean? But they could see that the Kamala Harris brand of politics had to be destroyed. And in some ways, Trump himself has destroyed the old Republican brand of politics. Now, nobody in the Conservative Party is going to destroy the Conservative brand of politics, because it's run by a particular class and elite of people. And so the only way is to march through the middle. And that's what Reform could do. Look like they've got every chance of doing. And they need to improve lots of things. Their policies are a bit all over the place. But it's almost despite that, the voters are just saying, we want change. Remember, Labour got elected on the basis of we are the change party. And everybody, now they've seen them in power, realises, oh, that elitist disdain and disgust for ordinary people who brand us as far right or racist or whatever, that's not confined to the Tory grandees. There's actually loads of people in the Labour Party prepared to do that. It's the first type of message we got from Keir Starmer in relation to Southport and the riots. And so people now are just saying, never again, not going back to Labour, not going back to Tories.
What about Nigel's sensibilities? Him as a human being? I mean, I know you're saying he wasn't your boss, but you did work with him up close. Does he have the capability to be a Trump-like figure? The reason you're watching this show is because you know that these days, and we've been discussing it lots at the moment, it's impossible to trust the mainstream media or the so-called fact checkers who claim to patrol social media. And that's for a very good reason, given the Brexit debate, COVID debacle, and demonisation of Donald Trump. But I've got the solution for you. Today's sponsor, Ground News, created by a former NASA engineer to provide you with the only safe way to consume the headlines, is going to solve so many of these issues. Go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out for yourself, by the way. But I want to show you this incredible website and app in action. So let's take the recent story. We've discussed lots of Outspoken of Elon Musk's fallout with Nigel Farage over Tommy Robinson, which the left-wing legacy media tried to whip up to destroy all three men, actually. And by looking at Ground News, you can see very clearly that it's collated the 230 sources on this story in one place. But what Ground News instantly shows is how the story is being covered by the media and broken down by whether those media organizations lean to the left or right, illustrated by its biased distribution service, which features on all stories. Then you can scroll down and actually see every article about the topic broken down by the political position or ownership of the publication. So in this case, it shows quite clearly that Fox News gave a fair analysis compared to Mediaite and The Independent, which did not, lambasting the men as morons with big egos without actually looking into why this split happened and how it can be resolved. What's more, Ground News gets to know you personally, providing you with the news stories you're interested in, while also analysing your own biases and coming up with potential blind spots you might not be hearing about because of your media consumption. And look, I know you love the news, that's why you're watching Outspoken, but you don't trust the legacy media. But what Ground News does is give you the tools to understand the truth about what is going on in the world. It is the only way I read the news now, allowing you to see through media bias and manipulative narratives with no more relying on the MSM to define what's really going on for you. So go to ground.news/outspoken to check it out. You can subscribe through my link today for 40% off the Vantage plan, which is what I use for unlimited access. And I should say, by the way, Ground News is a really great organization. It is subscriber funded, and by supporting my sponsors like Ground News, you also support my work too. And for less than a Netflix subscription, you can get all the world's news in one place and think for yourself. It really has been a game changer for a news junkie like me. So let me just repeat the address. It is linked in the show notes below, or you can click on the QR code if you're watching on screen. But the address, ground.news/outspoken. But now, back to the show.
I don't know. I mean, he's his own man. And obviously he's friendly with Trump. I think as the leader of this particular part of the populist revolt, I think he embodies, for me, somebody who could take us forward. Yeah, because he's got the backbone. You just showed him dealing with Rachel Reeves. He's got the humor. He's got a certain loyalty factor, because even people who don't like him recognize that he's a substantial and important political figure. He's not a nobody, right? He's not going to be walked over. And I think that's very important for anybody who's assumed or is got a leadership position. So I think he probably is. I mean, he himself has rightly pointed out that he doesn't want to do this forever. And it might be that he takes the next step forward and then he has said, and then hands over to younger or different people. But I think that it's very important that I hope in many ways that Nigel will stick the course until the next election, because I think that he is likely to be, or much more likely to be, internationally recognized as somebody of substance. And it doesn't matter. You see, you can say, not you, but people can say Farage is, he's uncouth, he's a chancer, all the things that people say about him. But actually, he's done some very important, he's moved politics in a way that I actually think, some of it at least, is essential. I mean, we wouldn't have got Brexit over the line without Nigel Farage. I mean, that's the reality. That's why, despite my personal, anxiety about standing for the Brexit Party alongside Farage, and when I actually took the nomination, I actually said at the press conference, I never, ever, ever thought that I would be sitting on the same platform as Nigel Farage. It just wasn't my DNA, not my tribe. But actually, he was I don't want to look like I was being disrespectful when I said it didn't work under him, although that was true. But actually, he was very respectful of me, and he encouraged a broad range of political people to stand as would-be MEPs during that election. And it looks as though his sensibilities are allowing him to let go a little bit of the way that the Reform Party is organising. And there are now thriving local groups being set up. And I suppose credit then to Zia and to Richard, who kept the show on the road, that we're in a position now where that's happening. And I do want to say it's made a huge difference, by the way, that they've got those 5 MEPs, because MPs,
yes,
because it's allowed some sort of, without being silly, allowed some respectability. They've shown they're like proper grown-ups in a way. I mean, Rupert Lowe's like a one-man parliamentary accountability machine. I mean, immensely impressive. So that's made people who wouldn't have thought of them before think, oh, they're all right.
100%. I mean, look, I almost feel like celebrity culture is dying out. We saw that in America, and actually we need some political stars. And I feel like the Reform MPs, because there's so few of them, are becoming that. It's almost helped them having that low number. But speaking of political stars, Claire Fox, I want to talk about something that you did in the House of Lords this week. But to set it up, I think it's important to provide context. And I'll show you a little bit of a very impressive woman, Katie Amis. She's the daughter of Sir David Amis, the Conservative MP who was killed, murdered brutally in a terror attack by an Islamist extremist who had been referred to the Prevent scheme. Now, Katie was on the show earlier this week, making it very, very clear she intends to fight hard against Keir Starmer and Yvette Cooper. Watch.
Oh, I will be speaking to them. It is absolutely absurd that they can launch an inquiry immediately into one attack and not another. What are they hiding? What is going to come out in this inquiry that they do not want seeing the light of day? It's going to be an embarrassment for them, and it's going to be something that they don't want to have to discuss. But how can you look at yourself in the mirror at night? How can you claim that you're my dad's friend if you are actively keeping his family from getting the answers that they deserve?
Now, what's despicable is Katie Amos has been ignored by the vast majority of the Westminster establishment, but not Claire Fox. And Claire, I want to watch this very important question that you put to Labour in the House of Lords this week.
The passion and fury from Katie Amos, David Amos's daughter, over recent weeks, demanding a full inquiry. And I'd just like to say she's very much her father's daughter, and he'd be so proud of her. But she feels as though the government are ignoring her. And I want to ask the Minister, will he please look seriously at her common sense suggestion that the Axel Rudder-Cabana Prevent inquiry is expanded to include her father's murderer, Ali Harvey Ali, because, as she says, it's wrong to pick and choose which murders Prevent failed to prevent should be investigated. Also, does the noble lord agree that both cases have a lot in common, not least that politicians can get distracted with some bizarre blame games? And when Sir David died, we had a whole swathe of people discussing online civility, anything but discussing radical Islamism. And after the Southport killings, what have we been discussing? Selling knives on Amazon. It doesn't feel too serious to me. So I think a full inquiry into both together would be helpful for everyone.
I'm grateful to the noble lady. What we have done is we have ordered a public inquiry into the Southport murders, and we have agreed to do that, and are looking currently at terms of reference and a number of other measures to get that inquiry underway. We have asked for an initial Prevent review from the noble Lord Anderson of Ipswich in relation to the murder of Sir David. And I too, like the noble lady, pay tribute to Sir David's daughter Katie, who has done what I think has made her proud of standing up for the legacy of her father, but also standing up to make sure that her father has justice and that lessons are learned. And that is an absolutely vital role for her to do. We are going to review, first of all, the noble Lord Anderson of Ipswich's examination of what's happened on top of the reviews that have been undertaken, which we've published this week. And in the light of that, we'll consider further discussions downstream. And that may not satisfy the noble lady now.
And I presume it didn't satisfy you, Claire Fox, because effectively they are ignoring Katie Amos just like they ignored her for all of these years.
Yeah, so I mean, that's the kind of word salad I have to listen to all the time.
Oh,
I mean,
God, I feel for you.
I deserve a bloody medal. That's all I can say.
Yes.
But I do these things. Listen, by the way, I want to just give credit and to you, because a lot of people wonder whether this world of YouTube channels matters or is important as opposed to the mainstream media. And I have to say, I mean, the Academy of Ideas, we have a YouTube channel. It's not quite like yours, but archives every single debate we've ever organised for 20 years, or what have you. And they are important because I actually heard that story on your channel, right? That's where I heard Katie Amos speak. I listened to that with my mouth wide open. I could not believe the way she'd been treated. And I hadn't seen it on the news. I hadn't seen it anywhere else. It was to your credit that I watched that interview. And then as soon as I saw it, I only found out half an hour before that there was going to be any questions on this issue. I rushed in. I wasn't even meant to be there so that I could ask that question.
Oh, I'm so happy about that.
Well, you inspired it. And that's very important, isn't it? Because it shows that this new world of alternative media, it's not even called that, but you know what I mean? The YouTube world of where we can speak truth to power can then actually have an impact on political discussion. Because even though it was a word salad answer, by the way, it was suitably, I think, muffled and embarrassed. He didn't really, he wished I hadn't asked the question. There'd been a lot of quite good questions, by the way, from friends of Sir David Amess beforehand, but I felt they didn't really put them on the spot. So what I'm going to do to follow up is I'm in touch now with Katie, and I'm going to pass on the details of the noble Lord the Minister, Lord Hanson of Flint, so that she can write to him, because he said he understood where she was coming from. Well, let him be on the receiving end of her attempt to change their mind. I mean, they are not going to do an inquiry into David Amess's murder,
which is astonishing.
I think it's astonishing. But you see, they feel, dare I say it? I mean, I'm going to say it, so it's outspoken. I think they feel that somehow the Southport murders, the slaughter of those children, right, is safer territory for them, because there's a sort of ambivalent. I mean, Prevent were useless, and in fact, all the institutions were that let that happen, and well rehearsed. But actually, Axel Rudder Cabana doesn't fit into the particular brand of terrorism that the government don't want anyone to talk about. So before my question in the House on that, the minister kept saying whether it's radical Islamism, far right extremism, like it's always all a mush, yeah, everybody. What they don't want to do, I'm afraid, and they're still avoiding, and we saw it with the grooming gangs and the rape gangs and so on, is they do not want to talk about the rise of radical Islamism in the UK. They've got an inquiry as we speak into the harassment, bullying, and terrorizing of candidates during the general election by radical Islamist supporters of Palestine rights, who basically terrorized Labour candidates. And it really kind of shook them up, and they've set an inquiry up. But whenever I ask about that, there's a kind of, oh yes, we will be. I mean, for God's sake, they want to avoid it. And so I think that because we know absolutely Sir David Amess's murderer was inspired by radical Islamism, the nihilistic, vicious anti-Western movement that's responsible not only for the pogrom on October the 7th that killed Jews, is anti-Semitic in its nature, but also wants to destroy the West. Because they don't want that discussion, I'm afraid they're avoiding looking into what happened in relation to Sir David Amess.
Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please click on my face just to the bottom left to subscribe to this brand new independent news source, and turn on the notification bell so you'll be alerted to our brand new live shows, uncancelled interviews, and special royal episodes. Outspoken is also now available as a podcast, so you can listen to the show every weekday on the go, wherever you are.